When we're training in meditation, it's important that our good intentions extend beyond the simple act of closing our eyes. In fact, there's a really funny old story about a very impatient yogi meditating in his cave. Wondering what the yogi was up to, a traveller passing by asked him, excuse me, do you mind if I stop in? The yogi, being very disciplined, kept his eyes shut and continued without saying a word. Thinking the yogi must be a little hard of hearing, the traveller said a little louder, excuse me, do you mind if I come in? Eventually the yogi opened his eyes and said, can't you see? I'm trying to meditate. Apologising, the woman went on her way. But she hadn't got very far before she started to think, wonder what kind of meditation he's doing. So she returned to find the yogi sitting in quiet contemplation. Excuse me, she asked, what sort of meditation is this? The yogi, letting out a big sigh, said, I'm meditating on patience. The woman said, oh, okay, interesting, thanks, and left once again. So the yogi returned to his meditation. As the woman continued her journey, she found herself thinking, wow, patience. I could really do with some of that. I wonder if I should ask him for some instruction. So once more she went back to the yogi's cave. But so infuriated by all the interruptions, this time the yogi jumped up and screaming and shouting chased the traveller out of the cave. Clearly, training the mind is about much more than sitting still with our eyes closed. It's about bringing a gentle and flexible approach to our practice, and as a consequence, into the world around us. The conditions may not always be easy, but the journey's about embracing them, making these so-called obstacles part of our practice. The practice of resting the mind in awareness, at ease with ourselves and at ease with the world around us. It's quite normal when we start to meditate for the mind to jump around all over the place. We might find it tends to chase after all the little things, to be constantly moving about, from the present to the past to the future, in fact to rarely be still at all. Fortunately, the mind can be tamed, not by forcing it to stop or trying to make it sit still. We don't want to trap it. That would just stir it up and create even more movement. But by training the mind, having an awareness of when our attention has wandered off, and gently bringing it back with a kind and friendly hand. In this way, the mind slowly becomes a little less restless. It also becomes more comfortable with this idea of sitting still. In fact, it might even come to enjoy it. This analogy for the mind has been around for thousands of years. Thankfully, so has the knowledge that, with time and practice, we can learn to train this monkey. One of the things you'll notice about learning meditation is that there's a lot of repetition. In many ways, it's the same as learning any new skill. If we want to refine things, the only way to do it is by repeating it over and over again. Of course, after a little while, we might not be quite so dependent on the instruction, but it's still there, if we need it. It gives us a framework to refer to as we continue learning through direct experience. So as you move through these daily meditations, sure, there are some core elements that are ever present, that will become very familiar, but every single day is different. Because even if you're doing the same technique today that you did yesterday, the mind is different, and therefore the experience is different. So as much as possible, approach each day lightly, as though it's the very first time you've witnessed the mind. If you can maintain this sense of playfulness and curiosity, then there'll always be something new to learn. One of the most challenging parts of meditation is what's sometimes called the dark side of the mind. These are the thoughts and fantasies that we'd rather didn't appear in the mind. Whether they're exciting, violent, vengeful, or maybe even sadistic in nature. We might think we shouldn't be experiencing them. But these thoughts are perfectly natural, and there's obviously no need to act on them. But why do they seem to appear more often once we begin to meditate? Well, typically, we go through our day with quite a heavy filter on the mind, blocking out these thoughts that we don't like, either habitually or intentionally. When we block them out habitually, we're unaware that it's even taking place. We're just so caught up in our day-to-day thinking. But by meditating, we're creating more space in the mind. So it's not that there are more of these thoughts, we just see them more clearly. But when we're blocking them out intentionally, we already see the thoughts clearly, but we're resisting them, perhaps fearful of what they say about us as a person. But what meditation shows us is that we're not our thoughts, so there's no need to judge them, to identify with them. We see that they don't make us a mean person, a terrible person, a twisted person. And it's through this process that we discover peace of mind, allowing thoughts to come and go, at ease with the mind, exactly as it is. Think of the mind as a still pool of water. Each thought is like a raindrop. It creates a ripple on the surface. If it starts raining very hard or it's perhaps a little windy, then the pool might become so cloudy that we can't see what's on the bottom. But the potential to return to our still pool of water is still there. In fact, by training the mind, the ripples naturally begin to slow. And as the surface of the pool becomes still, it gets easier to see what's beneath the surface. Sometimes we might like what we see, at other times, well, maybe not so much. Now, occasionally finding things we don't like may sound off-putting, but it's really important because it's part of letting go of those things. Accepting what's in our mind also helps us to be less critical of ourselves. It can even help us to be less critical of others. So we start to feel more content in life, to experience more harmonious relationships, and to be more at ease with the world around us. Training the mind is often quite different to how people imagine it to be. Maybe they have an idea it's about stopping thoughts or eliminating feelings, but the reality is a bit different. An easy way to think of it is to imagine yourself sitting on the side of a busy road, the passing cars representing the thoughts and the feelings. All you have to do is to sit there and watch the cars. Sounds easy, right? But what usually happens is that we feel a bit unsettled by the movement of the traffic. So we run out into the road and try and stop the cars, or maybe even chase after a few, forgetting that the idea was to just sit here. And of course, all of this running around only adds to the feeling of restlessness in the mind. So training the mind is about changing our relationship with the passing thoughts and feelings, learning how to view them with a little more perspective. And when we do this, we naturally find a place of calm. Will we sometimes forget the idea of the exercise and become distracted? Of course we will. But as soon as we remember, here we are, back on the side of the road again. Take a moment to imagine a bright blue sky, stretching off into the distance. Feels pretty good, right? This is a perfect metaphor for the mind, a blank canvas on which thoughts, feelings, and experiences appear. Okay, so maybe there are just a few clouds, but they tend not to bother us or distract us too much, especially if they're the cute little fluffy variety. This is how the mind appears when it's calm, bright, serene, and happy. But life isn't always easy. Sometimes there are a lot more clouds in the sky. Sometimes it might be the dark and stormy variety. Occasionally, we might even begin to wonder if a hurricane's on the way. It gets to the point that it's hard to think of anything else. In fact, sometimes we get so obsessed by the clouds that we forget about the blue sky altogether. But it's still there. Every time you're in a plane and you fly through the clouds, there it is, right? Without fail, blue sky. It's easy to forget that what we're looking for is already here. And that's why we need reminding. It might sound strange, but a really useful analogy for meditation practice is an elephant. Often in life we want to get everything done as quickly as possible. But when it comes to learning, that's maybe not the most skillful approach. But if you think about an elephant and the way that it moves, there's something really majestic about it. It's steady, it's slow, but it keeps moving forward. And with meditation, it's about regular, consistent practice, just showing up, time and time again. Just like our elephant, it might be walking along a very flat surface, might be walking up a hill or down a hill. It might be passing through a clear open space or a dense sticky jungle. The elephant doesn't really mind. It just focuses on one step and then the next and then the next. If we can bring this quality to our meditation practice, then we don't have to worry about progress or be in a hurry to get anywhere. And we don't have to stop because we've overexerted ourselves. We just keep going with that gentle, steady, consistent effort. Confidence is a funny thing. People sometimes assume it's about repeating a story in the mind over and over again. One that makes us look or feel really good. But the problem is, when we have an artificial confidence like this, it's always tinged with fear. What happens if it lets us down? What happens if we lose the storyline? What happens if doubt creeps in, that feeling of, am I living the right way? But there's a kind of confidence, you could call it quiet confidence, that's almost the opposite. It means letting go of all that stuff, putting down the old storylines. And when we let go of it, we experience something else. We experience vulnerability, uncertainty, and openness. But within that, somewhere, we discover quiet confidence. Perhaps it's just a byproduct of being willing to exist without those comforting stories. But the incredible thing is, because it's not separate from ourselves, we can't lose it. It's indestructible, and that's the beauty of it. To rest with that sense of vulnerability, not necessarily knowing, but at the same time being confident in not knowing. That's quiet confidence. When we sit to meditate, it's very tempting to remember previous meditations, hoping that an enjoyable one will be repeated, or perhaps fearing that a more challenging one will reappear. The trouble is, these ideas, our hopes and our fears, can really get in the way of a direct experience of the breath, of this moment. Because rather than observing the mind as it is, allowing it to naturally unfold, we're busy trying to create an idea of what we would like it to look like instead. That's why it's helpful to approach meditation with what's known as beginner's mind. It means sitting down without any preconceptions or assumptions, with no idea of what we'll find or what the outcome will be. So it's a very innocent mind. It's a bit like the way young children interact with the world, with a sense of curiosity and wonder. And there's a certain amount of delight inherent in that interest in the world. Kids aren't thinking about the outcome necessarily. They simply enjoy exploring for its own sake. So with beginner's mind, we're going into each meditation, recognizing that the experience is new. The mind is different. The conditions are different. And so rather than comparing our current experience to our expectation, we're actually present, interested in the body and mind as it is in this moment. Imagine you're walking down a street. It's a street you know well, maybe one you walk down every single day. But you're so caught up in your own thinking, wondering what you're going to have for lunch, thinking back to a conversation you had earlier, that you end up falling down a hole. Now at the bottom of this hole, you find yourself thinking, how did I end up here? Worse yet, the next day, you do the exact same thing. And then again, the next day. It may not sound like an especially cheerful idea, but as an analogy for the mind, it's really helpful. Because so often, we follow the same habits of mind, over and over again. And so we find ourselves in an emotional hole, maybe even a place that's really painful. But imagine if you started just noticing, being more aware of your surroundings. Sure, maybe next time you'd realize a little too late and you'd still end up in the hole again. But maybe the time after that, you'd notice the hole. and choose to walk around it instead. This is what it means to train the mind. This is what it means to have headspace. Sometimes, when we're meditating and we realize the mind's wandered off, we might not know how to react. Noting gives us some very clear direction, perhaps a greater sense of clarity and confidence. In that moment, we pause and identify the nature of distraction. Oh yeah, thinking, or oh, feeling. Having noted, there's a sense of having dealt with it. This makes it easier to let go of the distraction and gently return to the object of focus. And when it happens again, which it will, we simply apply the same approach, gently noting the nature of the distraction. Now, when we begin noting, the temptation is to try and catch every single thought and feeling, but that quickly becomes tiring. We only need note the distraction when we realize that we've been lost in thought, and even then, it's a very gentle acknowledgement. Imagine it a little less like whack-a-mole and a little more like a feather, softly being placed on a fine crystal glass. So noting is when we recognize the mind has wandered. We acknowledge it, gently note the nature of distraction, let it go, and then effortlessly return to the object of focus. Some days meditation will feel easy. On others, it might feel difficult. The trick is to gently stay with it each time, no matter how it feels. Look for a place in your routine where this exercise can slot in easily. Research shows it's easier to create a new habit when we do it at about the same time each day. We recommend doing it first thing in the morning, but you might need to be flexible with that. Find somewhere you won't be disturbed. Don't worry too much about background noise. I'll explain how to deal with that, but it might be easier at first if you have some peace and quiet. Make sure you're sitting comfortably before you start. Unless you're used to sitting cross-legged on the floor, I'd recommend using a chair. Sit with your legs and arms uncrossed, feet flat on the floor, and hands resting in your lap or on your legs. Try to keep your back straight, but not too tense. If you need it, a small cushion or a rolled up towel under your backside will help keep your back straight. And that's it. You're now ready to get some headspace. We're always taught the more effort we put in, the more we'll get out of life. But of course this isn't always true. Take falling asleep, for example. You can prepare in the right way, put yourself in the right position, and get yourself comfortable. But after that, well, you can't force it to happen, right? In fact, it works exactly the other way around. The harder you try, the less sleepy you become. It's only when we stop trying that we finally let go and drift off. And before we know it, we're waking up the next morning feeling refreshed, relaxed, after a good night's sleep. And it's a very similar story when we're training the mind. I think a nice metaphor for this is the idea of taming a wild horse. If you look at how a wild horse is tamed, rather than pinning it down in one place, the horse is led out on a very long rope and put in a big open spacious field. The horse runs around feeling like it's got all the space in the world. But very slowly, the rope's pulled in, and the horse adjusts to this feeling until it comes to a natural place of rest. And we're looking to do just the same thing with the mind in meditation. Not trying to pin it down in one place, but bringing it to a natural place of rest. So let go of any idea of needing to achieve something or get somewhere, and instead enjoy the opportunity to sit back, relax, and be present in the world. Learning to meditate is a little like learning to surf. In the same way that the ocean has many different moods, so does the mind. Sometimes it feels easy, even relaxing. At other times, it feels challenging, perhaps overwhelming. But as we spend more time in the water or more time with the mind, we come to know these different conditions. we begin to better understand what kind of approach is required each day. Some days, we'll need to apply a little more effort to stay balanced. On others, we experience almost effortless practice, or at least moments of it anyway. And as we become more stable in our practice, more balanced in our approach, we begin to feel more confident. Most important of all, we come to accept that although we can't control the waves, we can always learn how to ride them. Have you ever wondered why, when you chase after happiness, it seems so elusive? I think most of us do it, most of the time. There's an idea that happiness exists somewhere else. Not in this moment, maybe in another place, or it's with another person, just doing something different. When we chase after happiness as a movement, it's away from the present moment to another place, to some time other than now. And because we move away from the present moment, ironically, we move further away from happiness. Because when you think about it, happiness can only exist in this moment, right here, right now. Now, the interesting thing is that when we focus less on chasing our own happiness, and instead focus more on the happiness of others, we immediately find ourselves in the present moment. So not only are we benefiting others by having a more open, empathetic mind, but we're also benefiting ourselves by being more present and experiencing more happiness. So the quickest way, the surest way of experiencing more happiness in our lives is to focus more on the happiness of others.